Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm Hadar Susskind. I'm the president and CEO of Americans for Peace Now. Those of you who are regulars on our webinars and events know that this is the moment where I take part in the time-honored Washington tradition and filibuster for a minute as everyone comes from the waiting room into the webinar. So thank you for your patience, everyone. We're going to hold on for just one more minute as I ramble somewhat meaninglessly, if I'm going to be really honest about it. But, you know, who hasn't done that these last few weeks? But the good news for all of you is that we have a number of fabulous guests with us today, so you won't have to listen to me ramble too much. And with that, I am going to kick off our start once again there. So again, hello, thank you all for being with us today. I'm Hadar Susskind, the president and CEO of Americans for Peace Now. I'm happy to be with all of you, very grateful to you for joining us. I know you are here primarily to hear from our friend and colleague Yoni Mizrachi, who's going to talk about Shalom Achshav's Settlement Watch team and their new annual report, War and Annexation, How the Israeli Government Changed the West Bank During the First Years of the War. Before we get to that, a little bit of housekeeping. You should be able to see in the chat. We are, of course, recording this, and we will share with everybody the video recording, an audio Peacecast episode, and the transcript. We were trying to get the closed caption functioning, and unfortunately, Zoom's closed caption is just really not very good. So again, my apologies if you were looking for that, but we will be sharing a recording and a transcript. I remind you all, please, when you want to ask questions, which we welcome, to use the Q&A function at the button, not the chat. Ask the questions, and we will get to as many of them as we can. And of course, the report that is the topic of today's discussion, a link has also been shared in the chat there. So before we dive in, I want to share with you, I'm very pleased to share with you that today's event is co-produced with our colleagues from Canadian Friends of Peace Now, and I'm going to mess up the name. Alexander, maybe you say it for me so I don't destroy it. Go ahead.
La Paix Maintenant, which is
Paix Maintenant, thank you.
Now.
Yes, my apologies for my total lack of French, but these are our French Peace Now friends and colleagues, so thank you. And with us is Alexandre Journon from La Paix Maintenant, and our friend and colleague Gabriella Gallagher from Canadians for Peace Now. So we're very happy to have you both with us. And with that, maybe Gabriella, you want to say a few words? But you do need to unmute.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Hadar. And yes, I'm Gabriella Gallagher, the National Chair of Canadian Friends of Peace Now. It's an honor for us to co-host this important webinar. Canadian Friends of Peace Now is Shalom Achshav's partner in Canada. We have active chapters in 3 major Canadian cities, Toronto, Montreal, and Ottawa, and supporters from coast to coast. We have been standing shoulder to shoulder with Peace Now for 41 years, almost as long as the movement has existed. And I myself have been with the organization for most of those 41 years, as you can see by my gray hair. As someone has written, this peace-building work is a marathon, not a sprint. Some people ask me, especially these days, how can we keep going? Everything is so grim. And I always answer that the peaceniks in Israel keep going because they know their cause is just and because they simply must. They are our model and inspiration and incredibly courageous. Especially now, their work is crucial, and especially now, they deserve our support. So thank you for being one of those wonderful activists, Yonatan. I very much look forward to hearing you speak.
Great, thank you, Gabriella. Alexandre, you want to share a few words?
Yeah, so I'm Alexandre Journeau. I'm member of the Bureau of French Peace Now, La Paix Maintenant. I don't know exactly when it was founded. It was in the 80s by Ilan Rosenkir, which is also in the which is who is attending the call, and David Chemla. When they came back from Israel, they lived there something like 10 years each. And in La Paix Maintenant, our role is to echo all the work from Shalom Achshav, everything they do and everything they produce about settlements, the occupation, and obviously the two-state solution. We want to give a moderate yet lucid voice and Zionist also, which is really important, viewpoint on the Israel-Palestinian conflict, on the Gaza war. And I think that viewpoint being firmly Zionist. And we try to convey that to both the French Jewish public. It's not always easy to do so. But for information, we have our next colloquium in something like two or 3 weeks. And we will be, we are working with the media team of the French Jewish appeal, so to connect with them, and also to the broader public and to the institutions, a member of the parliament, and ministers, ministries.
Great. Thank
Yeah.
you very much. Thank you for being with us today. It is nice, especially in a moment like this, to all be together, at least on screen. So thank you both. With that, I want to turn to someone who I think many of you on the Zoom with us today know, Yoni Mizrachi, our friend and colleague from Shalom Achshav, who is the co-director of the Settlement Watch program. And, Yoni, dive right in. Tell us about the report. What's going on, man?
Okay, thank you everybody for organizing that, obviously, for Peace Now, Canada, France, and Europe and America, obviously, and for everybody who joined. As you know, I joined Peace Now about 2 years ago, and before that I was involved in other projects in the issue of the political conflict, and in general, I think I'm involved in this political conflict as an activist more than 2 decades. And today I'm going to talk mainly about the year of the war. Like it began on October 7, and we're going to talk about from October 7 to more or less October 24. But it's going to be kind of, I think, we're going to cover also the main changes that the current the Israeli government actually is doing in the West Bank. I'm planning to talk about general things, but also sometimes details, so I hope it won't be too detailed. And obviously, if there's something which is unclear, so please, you're all welcome to ask. I'm going to do a share screen that might at least will help me, and I hope will help to everybody else to understand what I'm talking about. So it might take me a second. Okay. So the report was launched in actually on October 2024, and we call it War and Annexation. How the Israeli government changed the West Bank during the first year of a war, which many things actually happened in this last year. But we can say that the roots of this change and the root of the annexation actually began even before the war. The war was just kind of actually assist, we can say, to the government to change everything in the West Bank. And when we're talking about the changes that we are facing in the West Bank, so the first decision was the structural and administrative changes towards annexation and occupied territories happened in February 23. We talked here, it says here 24, but it actually happened in 2023. When the government, we can say, or it was a Smotrich as a minister in the defense ministry, signed an agreement with the previous defense minister, Yoav Gallant, that he will be responsible to all the civil needs of the settlers in the West Bank. What it actually means that Smotrich created kind of, actually he took what we're calling the civilization of the civil administration, And all the settlers need, from constructions, advancing house units, public structures, which everything that related to land registrations, also legal issues, all kind of transferred from the civil administration, the body that in general responsible to everything that happened to the civilian life in the West Bank. It actually moved from the direct responsibility of the army, we can say, to the responsibility of a body that called Settlement Administration. The Settlement Administration is a body that was formed by Smotrich, was actually created on February 2023. And the idea is actually that they will be responsible to all the needs of the settler, but actually to all the needs of people who live in Area C of the West Bank. Again, the West Bank is divided to 3 areas. Area A and B is under, more or less, I don't want to make it too complicated, but I'm simplifying and saying that there are Area A and B, which are under the Palestinian responsibility, and Area C, 60% of the West Bank, remain under the civil administration responsibility. And most of the responsibilities moved to the hand of Smotrich. This is kind of change that was the beginning of what we're calling the annexation. Beginning of annexation, because it was moved from the military body to the Ministry, to the Ministry of Defense. It's defense,
which is
but
a
it's
civilian,
government.
right, which is
Okay?
moved it from military rule to civilian rule.
Exactly. That's very important. Thanks, Ayla, for that. Definitely for civilian rule. And actually, it was made in a very sophisticated way, because since it's under the defense ministry, some people think, and that the clarification of Hadar is very important, some people think, okay, it's just a change from one body that of the military to another, but it's not. It's actually moving to a civilian body, to the governmental body. Now, the beginning of the settlement administration impact was actually beginning on 2024, and that's very important. It was formed in 2023, and then we faced like few months that they have to organize the people, to recruit the people, obviously, to do all the administrative changes, and then October 7 began. October 7 began, it delayed the operation, but since February 24, we see a lot of involvement and actions that the civil administration, the settlement administration actually is taking. First, very important thing is actually the appointment of a person called Hillel Roth. Nobody knows him actually, but it's just a person that was appointed by Smotrich as a deputy of the administration for the civil affairs. But he's actually took everything from the civil administration, and he is actually the head. We can say that he's the governor of the West Bank, something like that. Everything that related to infrastructures, to aspects of land responsibilities, land registrations, everything is under his responsibility. It's a lot of responsibility. Something else that changed only recently during June, July, actually, is the finalization of the transfer of the legal power from the military to the defense ministry. What happening that we're having, if I'm not mistaken, 26 lawyers that sits in the defense ministry under Smotrich and under the settlement administration, and they are actually responsible to all the legal aspects of everything, of all, let's say, all the legal aspects of the civilian lives in the West Bank, but mainly helping to adopt the law in a way that will please the settlers' needs, or the settlers' actions to advance, obviously, house units, to advance the registration of land, which is very huge issue in the West Bank, who owns the land, who can use the land, and things like that. And many things actually very much related to that. And one example that I brought about it, and I think it's very relevant, is a very interesting change that happened just recently in this year, actually. State land that was declared in 2024. I mean, the years haven't ended yet, but we can see that in 2024, the civil administration, which actually the settlement administration, declared about 24,000 dunams as a state land. Now, state land is a misleading word because it's not a state land. It's a land that the civil administration usually declared as a land that has no owners. It's kind of a public land. And actually, the authorities can use it for the public's goods. Public's good or public need, it means that under the occupation, it means that it should serve the population, the local population. Actually, if you're asking us, we believe it should serve the Palestinians. What's happening when the Israeli authorities actually declaring, or the civil administration and now the settlement administration, actually declaring a land as a state land, it actually means that the Palestinians no longer can use this land if they used it before, but it also helps the settlers to build new outposts or taking over land and justify it as a land that belongs to us, to the state. And this is the terminology state land is something that came from the settlers, but obviously there's no state in the West Bank, so we shouldn't call it like that. I'm just saying the terminology they're using. So you can see that in 2024, just in this very small aspect, it's much higher than every year before, and it's actually 50% of what was declared since Oslo Accord or something like that, according to our numbers. This is one change, for example, that is very obvious change that you can see, but when we're talking about land registration and land ownership, there's so many details that I didn't bring here, but actually it helps the administration to change many things.
Before you move on from this,
Yes.
can you go back to that for a second? I was
Yes.
curious. So, this year they did so much because they can. It caught my eye that last year was 0.
Yes.
Is there some reason that they didn't do it at all last year?
According to my understanding, this is what I said before. They didn't do it last year, mainly because it took time to Smotrich to form this kind of settlement administration. I mean, it was new body.
So it's just the bureaucracy, basically.
A bureaucracy, but also Smotrich didn't want it to be like just a temporary body. He wanted to establish something very strong body, and it took him a while. And he mentioned that in the discussion that actually, if I'm going to my next slide, in June 2024, the Religious Zionist Party held an event where the main speaker was Minister Smotrich. And Smotrich mentioned that, by the way, he mentioned that the plan of establishing the settlement administration is also to make something that will remain after he will leave the office or his position, not something that will be temporary. Now, and in this meeting, he actually explained what he's doing. And he said, we wanted that the administration, the settlement administration will be easier to swallow in the political and legal context, so that people wouldn't say that now going an annexation and sovereignty, etc. So we did not change the legal status of the land. The military commander is still the sovereign. Okay, and then he continued and he said about the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he is fully with us. But what is interesting about the quote of Netanyahu, the two parts very interesting about the quote of Smotrich, that first of all he said exactly what I wanted to say before, that he formed a body that it's annexation without calling it annexation in the international law or something like that, although there's no except of a bill in the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, it is an annexation. And it's an annexation that is planned to stay here for long, as every annexation that we're doing. And in that respect, we can talk also about the annexation that Israel did in East Jerusalem. So you can, so in that respect, it's almost the same. Regard to responsibilities is even more problematic because, okay, I don't want to go to too many details, but annexation without giving rights to the Palestinians in the West Bank. I don't want to go to so many details to do details, but in East Jerusalem, the Palestinians have some rights. So here it's annexation with no right, and you can all imagine what it means, annexation with no right to the Palestinians. And this is what actually Smotrich did in the big picture. But the big picture of doing that has also effect on the military action or the military work in the West Bank, and that's very important. And for that respect, it's not only Smotrich, we have also other politicians who are very much involved in what is happening in the West Bank. What happened after this government was formed, one of the things is what was taken and what was left from the military in the West Bank. So the other aspect that is very important is the lack of cooperation with the police. In 2023, 2024, definitely, there was a lot of criticism from the military and the army about the police is no longer cooperating with them to prevent violence and things like that. We know the number that's saying that 50% that we have we have 50% less of arrest or because of settlers violence or arrest of settlers because of violence against Palestinians in 2024, although the number of the violence is much higher. So one thing that the military lost is obviously the police. The other thing is decision about all the civilians matter, like where to pave the road, what to decide, how to manage the civil life in the West Bank, to decide, for example, it's very relevant to security because the military can come and say, okay, we want to build, I don't know, a new neighborhood in a specific place. And then the military said, listen, from security reason, we don't recommend that. Today, the military doesn't have this power. And actually, Smotrich people can manage the West Bank in the way they want, whenever it comes to the civil life of the settlers. So the army lost two legs that used to have the cooperation with the police and the civil life that he also could control and be responsible with. The other thing which is very interesting and very disturbing is that even when we're talking about the soldiers, so we know today that soldiers in the West Bank were recruited from the settlers community, that many times actually from the next or the nearby settlement, they are the people who were recruited as soldiers and are responsible to the security in the region. Or sometimes the settlers recommended to the army who to recruit as a soldier to protect the settlement themselves. So that's something which is very disturbing and problematic when we're talking about controlling the West Bank and how the army can control the West Bank. And there is always a pressure of the settlers since October 7 to block the entrances and the exits of Palestinian towns and villages to the main road of the West Bank. So we having situation in the West Bank since October 7 that the Palestinians not only trapped in the West Bank. Before October 7, the Palestinians were more or less trapped in the West Bank. If you don't have permission to work in Israel, you cannot go outside to work in Israel, or you cannot go also to the settlement, but you could have like a more or less go all over the West Bank as you want. If you want to go from Ramallah to Nablus, you can use the main road. If you go from a small village called Tuane to Hebron, you can do that with the main roads. What happened after October 7? The army blocked dozens of exits and entrances of Palestinians, and it became very difficult. What is interesting that after a while, when the army wanted to open this exits and entrances of the villages in order to allow normal life again to the Palestinians, you can see in the photo that I have here above the top photo from the Tapua settlement. The block here was made by the settlers. We're talking about a case, a very interesting case, by the way, that the settlers decided to block the main road of the village of Yasuf. The army wanted to open the road, and for months he had all kind of negotiation with the settlers and sometimes clashes. Eventually, what the army had to do is to have a military hold that prevent from the settlers to block the road. This is how it works today in the West Bank. Another example is actually a case of, I put here the road of Kusa, that today Kusa is a village southern to Nablus, but the main road from Kusa to Nablus is actually blocked because of military decision or settler decision, how you want to call it. Why it's very relevant to what's happening in the West Bank? Because the whole infrastructure created situation that Area C is actually became in the hands of the settlers in the last year. And the settlers use this opportunity exactly how they know how to use opportunities, which means, first of all, if you're looking at the numbers of the outposts that the settlers built in the last year, according to in the last 2 months, okay, I'm talking about from October to October, the settlers actually built 47 new outposts, which means 47 new holds, illegal even according to the Israeli law. And these holds, you can see in the map, are spread all over the West Bank. Some of them are not in the map. There's also one north to Jenin, for example. All of these outposts are all over around the main cities. Many of them are very close to a Palestinian communities, obviously, closer than before. And this outpost is something that numbers which are much higher than what we used to see. I just brought here 2 photos to see how the outpost began. Sometimes it could be like a few caravans, like in Tkoa Vav, which is here, okay? Just a few caravans. Sometimes it's just a tent and ships, and it's what we're calling a farm outpost, like we're having here. It's here, okay? Which is here. And this small outpost actually responsible to 1,000 of dunams, 1,000 of acres also, that the people of the outpost trying to take control, mainly through the farm outpost, because the farm outpost usually having sheep or cows, mainly sheep actually, and they're grazing thousands of dunams all over. And that is a way to take over a lot of land in the West Bank. And that's something very interesting that we see happening illegal, which means although there are many legal assistance from the government, still the settlers using the illegal methods to take over land in the West Bank. And the civil administration doing nothing, obviously, because Smotrich very much involved. And also, I just want to explain the number 47, why it's so unique, because if we're talking about 2023, the year of this government was already formed, by the way, and obviously didn't do very much about outposts. Either the settlers built 25 outposts. In the year of in the time of the Second Intifada, was also a time that we know that many outposts were built. We're talking about 20 or 23 outposts. In the last year of Trump administration, we can see like 19 outposts. So in 2024, or more or less, we're talking about 47 outposts. By the way, we end the year with more than 50 outposts, which shows how much outposts they build, much double than the top year, the highest, the record year before. And it shows something about lack of any enforcing the law in the West Bank. This is one method that we see that the settlers did this year and change a lot of things in the West Bank. But many other changes happening in this unprecedented year. And one of them is, and again, it goes with what the government decided and also what the settlers doing. So next to this illegal outpost, the government decided about establishing 5 new settlements. Establishing 5 new settlements, it's again something that we never had before. Since Oslo Accord in 1993, I don't think that Israel decided about establishing more. I don't think that in all the 30 years of Oslo Accord, the government recognized 5 new settlements. I mean, there were like one was in 2018 because of the eviction of Ammon. It doesn't matter. What I want to say is that deciding to establish 5 new outposts is definitely, obviously, a violation of, I mean, not exactly clear violation of Oslo Accord, but definitely a clear change in the policy of the Israeli government. All the years, all the right-wing government until now, they used to say, okay, they are outposts, they are illegal, but they try to avoid declaring a new settlement. By the way, in 2023, also Israel actually advanced and declared about new 10 settlement, but that shows the uniqueness of this government, 10 and 5. Next to the decision of the government, again, the government is advancing the settlers' needs. The settlers doing a lot of constructions which are illegal. For example, construction of dozens of new roads, which means that a dirt road, like you can see here, or sometimes paving roads with caterpillars or buggers or whatsoever. We're talking about dirt roads. Sometimes there are a few hundred meters, like here. You don't see it very clearly, but there are trucks here that bring the dirt to pave the road. Or sometimes roads which are actually goes for kilometers, like few kilometers, few miles if you want, which means this is kind of a road that everybody, which means that mainly the Palestinian knows, it's a settler's road, which means a settler's road, they are illegal road, but the Palestinians obviously avoiding using this road and understanding that this land was taken by the settlers. The road is actually connecting between different outposts, sometimes for the mother settlement to the new outpost, but sometimes from the outpost to the main road for the settlers. They are all illegal, and they are definitely changing Area C. Again, although there are many changes that the settlers doing, as I said before, there are also a lot of changes with what the government decided. And we call it also an outrageous year, because this year the government decided, for example, that illegal outposts will be recognized as outposts that eligible for funding for infrastructure, which means you have illegal outposts, but you can get governmental fund, which is something that you cannot have in normal, a proper Israeli laws and a proper administration, whatever you think of. When we're looking at the numbers, no residential building permits for Palestinians. Usually they have few. This year, nothing, 0, compared to 8,681 house units that were advanced for settlements. When we're talking about settlers' violence, which is very important to talk about, and their impunity, we're talking about at least 1,360 incidents of violence. Approximately 1,630 individuals have been forcibly displaced from their homes. We're talking about at least 19 Palestinian communities. In many cases, these communities were forced to flee because of an outpost was built next to the community. Many times, by the way, after the outpost, or after the Palestinian community left, an outpost was built in order to prevent them to come back. So we see that the outpost is actually a tool that forced the Palestinians to flee from Area C. And it's part of the struggle of Area C. If you look at the map here, you can see again so many points all over the West Bank. There's no specific area that the settlers decide not to work on. Don't worry, soon I'm almost done. I just want to talk something about money, because what is happening in the West Bank is not just about actions, and I mean, we always have to follow the money. Money is a very important aspect of what's happening in the West Bank. And when we're talking about, we know about different channels of money that the settlers getting for the outposts and things like that. But this year, again, and this is why it's outrageous here, is funding for illegal outposts and farms. The Israeli government decided to allocate 75 million shekels for outposts, which means, again, money for illegal structures, which is very, very unique. This has happened only this year. Also, when we're looking at the percentages of how much money goes to the West Bank comparing to Israel, so one example is decision of 7 million shekels. 7 million shekels is $1.8 billion. By the way, I mean, maybe I should talk about it in dollars. For road construction, which 22% of the Transportation Ministry's road constructions budget. Although the settlers are less than 5% in the, I mean, in the proportion in the population. The budget is around 22% when it comes to construction for transportation. We don't have the numbers, but I wouldn't be surprised that also in other budget aspects, they're also getting something like that comparing to what they are in the government. The government obviously doubled the budget of the Ministry of Settlement. Ministry of Settlement is a ministry that supporting and helping building new settlement, obviously. And there is a specific division which is called the Settlement Division, and their budget was added in 302 million shekel, which is I think around $80 million, maybe a bit more. Most of this budget goes to build new outposts, farm outposts, and so on. So we see that also the money is something that the settlers have no no limit about it. I brought here one picture of what is called Hawara Bypass Road, opened on November 23, a month after the war, with the pressure of the Ministry of Transportation, Miri Regev. She wanted this bypass to be built. It serves exactly 4 settlements, which means 8,000 settlers. They decided that after this road will be built, you can see it's empty because it's hardly been used. Everybody can use it, also Palestinians, but it was made mainly for the settlers. It goes from one settlement to another eventually. It's still actually kind of a road. The government invested, at least $100 million in this road, and eventually it's almost not really used. And they're actually insisting to use the road that goes through the Palestinians' villages in order to show who is the sovereign. So this is when we're talking about money, how it goes. In general, I want you just to summarize everything that I said so far. I think that the war, there are all kinds of quotes that come from different ministers about what happened this year. But I think the war eventually actually served the settlers in the way they already planned. Even if October 7 wouldn't happen, the settlers or this current government planned the idea to give like a free hand to the Palestinians, to the settlers, to build the outposts as we saw in 2023, and to advance the idea of the annexation. But the war definitely helped the settlers to escalate everything they did and to work in a much higher speed, obviously, and actually to create facts on ground in a scale that I think even they didn't expect. And when the Orit Struk minister said that it's a year of miracle, it means that even she didn't expect that in this year the settlers and the government could do so much in the West Bank. And this is where we are standing today. And obviously, I just want to say the last really thing is that what happened in the West Bank was very much known to the international community and the American administration, definitely Biden administration. He tried to do a lot of things, and the question is obviously what will happen with the next administration that's coming. According to what we see, the Israeli administration is very keen to continue in this policy. This is more or less my talk, and now I will stop sharing.
Thank you.
And I'm opening the floor for any comments.
Thank you. Obviously, all of us here, like so many people there, have spent so much of this past year looking at, talking about, working on what's happening in Gaza, now Lebanon also. So I really appreciate, first of all, you coming on and sharing all of this and all of these details and this information with us. But more importantly, you're doing this work, and the work that you do with Hagit, with the whole Settlement Watch team of documenting this, sharing this information. You said the Biden administration knew and knows what's happening. We know that to be true because, you share this with us and we share this information with folks in the administration, people in Congress, and it's incredibly powerful and important. And maybe we'll get to a question about the sanctions. But before we talk about the sanctions, I want to share one piece, and we'll open it up. I'll start going through some of the questions. A few of the folks who are on with us today were lucky enough to be with me, with you, in Israel and in the West Bank this spring. And we went with you on a tour and looking at some of these outposts, and we saw what you're talking about. We saw, roads that were closed with rocks and piles of dirt and things where the settlers had taken it into their own hands. And the one piece that I think was maybe the most powerful thing for me personally was seeing a new military outpost blocking the road of a settlement. And the fact that when we pulled up to that outpost, hoping to use the road to go around the settlement and move around through the West Bank, we weren't allowed to do so because the driver of our bus was Palestinian, was an East Jerusalem Palestinian, and the two settlers who were there, the two soldiers who were clearly settlers, as you were talking about earlier, wouldn't let us pass. And it didn't matter that that's not the law, and it doesn't matter that that's not the military policy. We had two guys who, again, I don't know them, but were likely from the next door settlement, the way you said, and they just were not letting Arabs through, as they said. They actually said much worse things than that. But that was, I think, for me and for everyone who was there, a very disturbing and powerful experience. I want to jump into some of the questions that folks have asked. And again, I'll remind everybody to use the Q&A function, and we will take questions we can get through. The first question actually is people wanted to know if you would be willing to share your slides and share the presentation. So if you're good with that, we have them, and when we share the recording and the transcript of everything of this, we'll do that as well. One of the questions, and it goes to what you were talking about the, I don't know if we want to call it a conflict, but between the military and the settlers of who's opening the roads, who's not opening the roads, is whether or not you think the military really wanted to open those crossings, really wanted to enable that, or is that just a thing that they say and let the settlers kind of do what they want? And I think it opens up the bigger question again between this newly created dynamic between the military, which has had the legal authority in the West Bank since 1967, and now this civilian leadership under Smotrich.
Well, thanks. Very good question. And thanks. And I think that I think the military wants to open more roads than he opened. I mean, and I think the case of Kufri Yasuf Tapua settlement is a very interesting case because we're talking about commanders, which we cannot say these commanders, I'm not sure that, I'm almost sure that these commanders didn't come from Peace Now, okay? And they want, and for months, I know, I mean, because I see they negotiated with the people in the settlement and with the people who were recruited as soldiers. What happened is that the people that were recruited as soldiers in the settlement, they're responsible to keep the road open, and they didn't want to keep it open, so the commander had a problem. But what I want to say that during the year, I was witness for many cases that the settlers were not pleased with the policy of the military, okay? And it's obviously, and it's clear understood, we see it also in the media and everywhere, that blocking the Palestinians, keeping them in kind of ghettos, doesn't really help anyone. I mean, I didn't talk about the Palestinian situation. I talked about settlement. That was the idea. But the condition, the economic condition, and many things that the life of the Palestinians in area A and B are extremely problematic after this year, and everybody understands that it's very dangerous, okay? Obviously, I think it's also an aspect of humanitarian, and being human, but regardless to that and, and moral issues, it's definitely military wish to make more accessible for the Palestinian, the West Bank. They also explained so, and also there's a kind of it's called settler security policy that decided what the policy is, which decided we have to clean all the West Bank from Palestinian, or at least Area C from Palestinian. This is their decision about security, I'm sure it's not really coming from the military, because when I listen and I hear the military decision, they actually believe that more transference of Palestinians from one place to another is actually more security.
Yeah. So I'm trying to squish together a couple of the questions here. You know, we use some terms around the civil administration. And so there's a question, and the settlement division. Is the settlement division the civilian arm of the civil administration? So can you clarify that language a little bit?
Yeah, thank you. It's, by the way, it's extremely complicated to everybody, also people who are involved with that and trying to understand. And I want to say that's something.
In Hebrew and in English.
Hebrew, in English, and
sure, in Arabic too.
And in Arabic, and maybe even it was so complicated even to smooth it. This is why it took so long until it was open. And that's what I want to say. Many things. We in Settlement Watch, obviously, and the activists, we deal with the details, because there are many details in the occupation. I want to say something general. There are many details in the occupation. The idea of the occupation is details, all kind of laws, all kind of regulation, which you don't really even understand why they are problematic. Like, you know, it's kind of also under the umbrella of security, there are all kind of regulation. And it's very difficult, regardless to the settlement division, it's very difficult to understand what's happening. And it's very difficult to understand the small changes. But the small changes are very powerful, because these small changes go into one direction. That was a general, something general, which maybe I should say in the beginning. Regard to how it works. Historically, not historically. Until 2023, the civil administration, a body that related to the military, because the West Bank is occupied area, it's under the responsibility of the military. The military understands that it has to deal with Palestinians, obviously, that live there, civil population, and he established the civil administration. The civil administration was, by the way, established before Oslo Accord. What happened after Oslo Accord? That most of the Palestinians under the responsibility of the Palestinian Authority, but few hundred thousands who live in Area C, they are still in the responsibility of the civil administration, and most of the land, which is Area C, is under the responsibility of the civil administration. So we used to have, I hope I'm not making it too complicated, but we used to have a body under the responsibility of or it's kind of a military body that deal with the civil aspects. What Smotrich did, he took the military body, he created another body, he called it the settlement administration, and he kind of changed its location without really changing the location. Okay, officially it's still under the the civil administration. I'm trying to think about examples that, if you're familiar with how Israel operate, we have a president and we have the prime minister. Okay. The president could be the first citizen and whatsoever, and maybe the head of the state. Actually, as we all know, the power is in the hand of the prime minister. This is kind of, not exactly, but this is kind of what happened with the settlement.
It's a parallel, yeah.
Yes, okay? So the settlement division is the government. And they are the one who decide who will be the ministers, by the way. Okay, who will be responsible for the water, for the electricity, for the energy, everything, for other transportation. They decided about these people, and also about how to channel the budget, obviously, everything. So they're responsible to all. If you're American and now you are following probably how Trump going to form his administration, so it's exactly how the civil administration formed their administration for the West Bank. That maybe clarify that.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the big fundamental change, and the reason that they've done it in this sneaky way, is that not that they care so deeply about international law, but under international law, an occupation is a military occupation, and the military has to oversee that civilian population. And what they've done here by moving that control of the civilian population to the Israeli civilian political control is actually under international law, annexation. Now, that's why they kind of are trying to deny that they did exactly that. It depends, you know, who Smotrich is talking to. Another set of questions here are around the funding for the settlement enterprise. So, you know, you talked some about the government funding, which again, really, if you stop and think about it, blows my mind that the government is saying these settlements are illegal under our law, right? Not American law, international law. And here's 70 million shekels, or whatever the number may be for different things. It's quite remarkable. But the questions are, you know, where is the funding coming from in terms of foreign funding? Has that changed in the last year? And also a specific question that came in around this is whether or not the JNF, the Jewish National Fund, is involved in supporting the settlement enterprise also. Can you speak to those?
Yeah, I mean, about the last question about JNF, JNF is involved in supporting different projects, definitely in East Jerusalem and also in the West Bank. I'm not really remember that, and I think Hagit is more following the JNF. So in general involved, and also a discussion about how we will be involved, but definitely in East Jerusalem, definitely I know about a few cases. The funding, the settlers understand, I think that what is important, the settlers understand that they have no existence without the Israeli government. In many ways, if you're familiar with the Israeli politics, they are very like the ultra-Orthodox, understand that they need to be in the government all the time. They're obviously working and they are a bit different, and they join the army and go in the army and doing a lot of services, but eventually the settlement enterprise is based on governmental money. It doesn't create money, okay? That's something you have to understand. It's not that, okay, I would like to, you know, everybody knows the story that California was created because of the discoveries of gold. Okay, kind of. It doesn't matter if it's true or not. Doesn't matter. What I want to say, there is no gold in the West Bank. Nobody is going to live in the West Bank in order to gold, and nobody is going to live in the West Bank because it's a central industrial area that provide money. It doesn't provide money. It only takes money. And the money comes from the government, mainly from the government and from different ministers. Sometimes very direct from the Interior Ministry, who provide a lot of money to the settlements, lots. But also, as I mentioned in the talk, like you see some budget, like if you have a Minister of Transportation that want to be liked by the settlers, so Miri Regev also provides something, other ministers provide something. We see all the time that ministers kind of channeling money to the settlement, even without labeling to the settlement, you know, like you can say, okay, money for education about holy sites, and happen to be holy site like Hebron or the tomb of Rachel, something like that. Okay, all kind of games. Most of the money of the settlers comes from the government. That's how we know. I'm not saying there are a lot of now about other funds. Obviously, they're getting a lot of donations from Jewish and non-Jewish people who are very much in favor of the settlement. You're familiar with them maybe even more than me. A lot of money comes from America, obviously. That's obvious. And once upon a time, also a lot of money came from Russia, but now it's different. And that's how it goes. Yes, and it's kind of a system that provide its own money in all kind of channels. So yeah, and by the way, we don't succeed to follow all the money channels. It's very difficult.
Yeah. I'm just looking at the clock. We've got a couple more minutes. So I'm going to ask you two questions at the same time, and you can smush them together however you want. So one is really about whether the settlers united, the settler movement behind the idea of annexation. And I'll add to it, you know, I was speaking to an Israeli official here in Washington a little while ago who was saying publicly that, yes, there are some people in the government, Smotrich and others, who are saying, yes, annexation, full annexation, we're not giving the rights to Palestinians. They're happy to say that and sort of say, you know, you want to call that apartheid, you want to call it something else, have fun, we don't care. There are others in the government, is what this person was saying, that actually would rather keep the status quo, would rather keep the quiet annexation without making it official and saying it out loud because it's more comfortable for them that way. So what do you think sort of about that piece? And then separate, but I'm just throwing it in there for you right now, is, you know, the US just sanctioned Amana yesterday, 2 days ago, whatever it was. It's been a long week, as everyone knows. Obviously, the Biden administration over this year has issued a number of rounds of sanctions against violent settlers, some of the settler institutions, the individual outposts. You know, who knows what that will bring in the future. But what kind of impact has that had on the settlement movement?
I will begin with the second question, and I want to say that I think Biden was a president that understand, maybe, I don't remember an American president who understand the occupation and understand Israel and Palestine so good as Biden or Biden administration in general. And I think the sanctions are still very powerful tool. In the same time, I must say that the sanctions, you cannot measure the sanction after such a short time. It's not just a few months that you can measure the sanction, but we see from the pressure the settlers in, that they're definitely concerned about the sanction, and they try to advance all kind of bills in the Knesset against the sanction and things like that, and to help the people who are under sanction. So the sanction is definitely a problematic thing, especially because what I said before, they depend on the money. They don't have an income. They are not Russia that can sell the oil they have oil they can sell to India or whatsoever, okay? There's no gold, no diamond, and no oil, and nothing in the West Bank, nothing, more or less. Not exactly, but... So the sanctions are a very powerful tool, and also indication that shows we know what's happening, we are against that. So I have a lot of good things to talk about sanctions, but again, we have to measure it after a few years or something like that. And there's a question about what will happen with sanctions within the next administration with Trump and so on.
Of course.
But it shows, and also it shows to say the West Bank, what's happening in the West Bank is problematic. We are pro-Israelis, but we're against settlers. And also for us Israelis and Israelis activists like me or others, it's always important to show and to say to other Israelis, listen, these people are not against Israel, they're against the settlers. So in that respect, it was also a very powerful tool for us. I can talk a lot about the benefit of the section, but we have only 2 minutes, so I have to go to the other question. Most of the settlers want annexation. Definitely want annexation. They don't want to feel that they are the problematic kid in the class or whatsoever, or in the family. Most of the settlers want annexation. Probably some politicians prefer it will not happen because of what it means. I can say that I believe that Smotrich and his people, and even before Smotrich, even the Likud party, there were enough people who already prepared the papers and the idea how the annexation would look like. I believe their goal is to evacuate as much as they can Palestinians from Area C. So they will not face the situation that they will have to give them any rights, like in the level of Jerusalem resident or more than that, citizenship, full citizenship. And maybe this is one of the reasons why nobody's doing anything against the settlers' violence, or hardly anything. They would prefer to have annexation without apartheid, which means annexation without giving a lot of... They're not planning to give civil rights to the Palestinians, and I believe they have all kinds of ways to solve it. I don't know exactly.
You're saying they'd like the annexation, but they'd like no one to call it apartheid.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, they want no one to say that.
And yeah, that's how I understand. And again, it's also a question I can talk a lot about it, but let's see.
Yeah. Okay, well, listen, Yoni, thank you again for being with us. And as I said at the beginning, even more than that, thank you for doing this work. You know, as you were just saying, we say here all the time when people talk about who's pro-Israel or what policy is pro-Israel, that, you know, the settlements are not Israel. And making that distinction is among the most important things that I think all of us collectively do, is not letting the steamroller that just says this is pro-Israel, this is anti-Israel roll without recognizing that reality. And, you know, that is international law, that is American law, that is Israeli law. And that is also the basis for the hope that all of us have for a peaceful future, for a better future. because, you know, if they move ahead with annexation, that becomes a lot more difficult. So thank you for all of the work that you are doing. Thank you for being with us. And thank you again, everybody who joined us. We will share the recording, the audio, the transcript, and the link to Yoni's presentation. So
thank you, Hadar, and thank you everybody for organizing that, Max and Alex.
and thank you
Thank
to
you
our
all for coming, of course, and joining.
thank you to our colleagues from Canada and France for being with us
Yes,
as well.
thank you.
Okay, bye everybody.